Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us tonight for the Fire Safety Essentials presentation for Warburton and surrounds. So first, I'd like to welcome and thank you all for taking time out of your Sunday evening to join us tonight. Our goal is to try and keep this to around an hour, but we'll see how we go. More importantly, we hope that we can share some great information with you tonight. As way of introduction, my name is Ben Cash. I'm your presenter tonight. Alongside and helping me out tonight is Taryn Campbell, one of our co-hosts. We'd also like to welcome Hazel, who is the captain of Warburton CFA. You'll hear a little bit more from Hazel later on in the presentation, and Hazel will take you through a few of those more local issues and a great opportunity to ask any questions via the chat that you might have for the local captain as well. Before we get into the housekeeping and all of those sort of fun things, it is important that we acknowledge, do a quick acknowledgement of country. So from where I sit here down in Chirnside Park, just down the line, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional owners of the land of which I'm gathered at tonight, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. Acknowledging that there might be a few people from outside the area, and we acknowledge any elders who may be with us tonight as well. So just as a really quick welcome and host and a quick overview as to what we're actually doing tonight, because this wonderful concept of webinars are a new thing for doing fire safety presentations. So tonight is a webinar, which means that I can't see you. Hopefully you can see me, which means that I'm doing my bit right. It also means, though, that all of the microphones are muted, so you can yell and scream as much as you want at the computer, but I can't hear you. So we are recording it, as you may have seen. What's really important to know about that is that if someone watches the recording, they can't see who was on this, they can't see your names, so you are pretty well covered as far as confidentiality goes. So don't worry about that. No one can see you, no one can hear you, they can't see your names. So you're all covered on that respect. There is interaction tonight, so it's not death by PowerPoint or even worse, death by my voice. So you will be using the chat function tonight, which you'll find. If you have a look on our beautiful screen here, down near the bottom, there should be a chat icon. If you click on that, a chat screen will open up. And that's somewhere you can pop in any questions that you may have throughout this evening. And Taryn will try and reply to most of those as we go. And that way we can keep the presentation moving at a good pace. So if you want to open it up now, we will give it a trial in just a quick second. The other thing we will be doing tonight is playing with polls. So from time to time, we'll pop up a quick poll to get your feedback. All you have to do is select your answer, hit submit, and then we'll show you the results at the end of the poll. Now, no one who watches the recording can see those poll results, and I can't see who's answered and who hasn't answered. So feel free to go hard and be honest on them. It gives us a good indication of what we need to touch on and where we may need to give you a bit more information tonight and what you already know so that we don't cover it in too much detail. Now, there may be a few things tonight because we do have a couple of animations that will pop up, which may bring back some memories if you have gone through a bushfire before. If that is the case, feel free to leave the room, turn the sound off and come back in a minute or two, and it should be over by that point. So by all means, stop the prezzo, go for a walk outside the room, grab a glass of water and rejoin us afterwards. There is also details at the end of the presentation if any of this information does bring up some bad memories for you. So let's get stuck into a chat because I love to know who I'm actually talking to. I know it's a bit of a novelty. So open up your chat functions, and all I really want to know is where are you joining us from tonight? So are you joining us from Warburton? Are you joining us from East Warburton, or are you a bit further afield? Are you up at Reefton? So we've got some East Warburtons coming through. Glad to hear that you guys can hear me all clear. That gives me a little bit of confidence. Hazel, I'd be concerned if you weren't joining us from Warburton tonight. So it's good to confirm that you're definitely online with us. Lots of Warburtons. We've got a launching place. Welcome. Narre North. Doing the old sneaky. Checking it out. Westburn, beautiful, just down the road. Excellent. We've got a great variety of people with us tonight. So it's absolutely fantastic to have you all here. Upper Furtry Gully is joining us. Excellent. Welcome. It's great to have you all here with us. So what are we actually going to go through tonight? That's the next important bit. So we're going to be talking about the local fire risks, what to expect from a fire, and how do you know if there's actually a fire in your area? Because, well, that's pretty important. We'll go through some of the planning and decision-making processes and surviving if the plan fails. So when we talk about bushfire plans, we often talk about having a plan A, a plan B, then a plan C. So what happens if everything goes wrong? Now, tonight's going to be really top line. So we're not going to go into a lot of detail tonight, but we will try and touch on as much as we can in the time that we actually have. So without further ado, we are going to push on and we're going to talk about understanding our local fire risk. Before we do though, of course, there is a poll, which I always forget about at the start because I'm too eager to start talking. So what we would like to know, just to help us with the presentation tonight, is firstly, how long have you lived in the area? Because what we do know is that the Warburton area, there is a lot of people that are moving out from the city, and it really helps us understand how much detail we need to go through. We want to know about your knowledge of fire. Now, if you have very low knowledge of fire, that's excellent. It's great to have you on board here tonight because this is step one in that process. If you've got a huge amount of fire experience, then hopefully we can show you a few new things that you may not have known, or if nothing else, we can give you a great update for the season that we're expecting ahead. And of course, we want to know if you've been to a CFA meeting before, because this is a really new program. So we've only just started rolling out this program. So we're really excited to share it with you and get your feedback at the end as to how you enjoyed it versus the Fire Ready Victoria sessions that we've been rolling out over the last few years. So I can see that most people have voted there. So we'll wrap up the poll and let's have a look at the results. So 10 plus years have just taken the lead there. So 35% of people joining us tonight are long-term residents of the Warburton area. But it's also really great to see that there's quite a lot of people in that 0 to 5 year mark. So welcome to Warburton. It's a beautiful part of the world. I have the pleasure of going up on a fairly regular basis, and certainly a great place to be. Knowledge around fire, we've really got two spikes there. We've got the low and we've got the high. So we're going to cover a fair amount tonight, and hopefully for those of you in the low to very low and even medium, if you do have questions following this session, we do talk a little bit about bushfire planning workshops and what you can do to get more information and extend your knowledge. So I'd absolutely encourage all of you to follow that up after the session. And have you been to a CFA meeting before? A whopping 82% have said yes. So welcome back. Hopefully it was me and you really enjoyed it and you wanted to come back for more. Hopefully that's the case. And if you haven't been to a meeting before, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight, and we really do hope that you get a little bit out of the session. So we'll drop that poll off and we'll get straight into it. So understanding local fire risks. After all, that's what we're here to talk about tonight, and understanding your locality. So Victoria, as we know, is one of the most bushfire prone parts of the world. It ranks up there in one of the top 3 countries. So obviously the US is right up there with California as being one of the most bushfire prone areas as well. And also in Spain is right up there along with us down here in Victoria and even up into New South Wales. So bushfires is something that we do. It's part of our DNA, and it's definitely something that we've all experienced, in particular over the last 10 or 11 years with different parts of the state certainly being impacted by large bushfires. So when we talk about bushfires, the type of fire that burns really does depend on the terrain and where you are in the state, because we have a number of different scenarios for bushfires and where they burn. We also have grassland fires, which are quite prevalent, especially up in the northwest and through paddocks. We also get them a lot around the outskirts of Melbourne, sort of the Narre Warren, even through to the Churnside Park, Coldstream kind of area. lots of paddocks, lots of long grass, especially before they cut for hay, which can cause all sorts of trouble. So grasslands are a huge one. We also have the farmlands, which complement grasslands a lot of the time. We've got coastal fires as well, which burn through the shrub. But for tonight, our main ones that we're going to look at is bushland and mountainous forest area. So Warburton, where it is, obviously a stunning location. Mount Donabuang is a backdrop, beautiful part of the world. However, it is surrounded by those really long trees and thick, dense bush, which does lead to a unique type of bushfire approach and bushfire burn. Not to mention as well, the winds and how they swing around the valley. They also cause a few different problems for us when we do look at fires. But we'll talk a little bit more about the local risk with Hazel just a little bit later on. When we talk about bushfires, we often talk about different fire districts. They also link up a lot with the weather districts that we talk about, especially over the weekend with the severe weather warnings that we've had and the gale force winds and the strong wind warnings. It's really important that we know where we actually sit in the scheme of things. So if you still have your chats open, just a quick one. Where on this wonderful map in front of you do we sit? What fire district are we in? Just throw your comments in. We're getting a few centrals. Centrals are popping through. Central. Excellent. So we're all over it. We all know that we're in the central district, which is absolutely fantastic. So when we do look at the fire danger ratings, which we'll touch on a bit later, it's really important that we remember that we are in that central region. Now, the reason this map is so important, though, is because a lot of the time we go on holidays. Especially with COVID in effect, there's going to be a lot more local travel happening over this summer to experience our holidays. So before you go, make sure you do check what fire district you're traveling into so that you can keep up to date with all of the fire warnings that are happening in that area. Because unfortunately, bushfires travel with us. No matter where we go, we are always at risk that there could be a bushfire through summer. So the seasonal outlook, as most of you have probably heard, because I have covered it a lot on the news, is that we have entered into a La Nina pattern. So what on earth does that mean for our forecast? So at the moment, we do have the seasonal outlook from December through to February. So we've only just started the December part of the quarter. But what we're expecting is rainfall to be above average across most of Australia. In particular, you can see that we're lightly shaded, so we're not going to have exceptionally large rainfalls down here in Victoria, but we are expecting above average. We're also expecting the average daytime temperatures during December to February to be above the long-term average. And that is certainly something, looking at the map and the shading, that we're going to be impacted with in particular, as well as out west and up in the far north Queensland region. So we are expecting still those warm temperatures and slightly higher precipitation, so most likely with a bit more humidity as well, which leads to really great conditions for growing. And that's certainly a risk for us this year, in particular around grassland, is how quick it's going to grow. And then if we do get a drying phase through the summer, that could result in some pretty high risk activity for us, especially into early next year. At the moment, though, it is still quite wet out there. I'm sure Hazel will touch on that a little bit later as to how it's all looking out in Warburton. But I'm sure, as most of you know, it is still pretty green out there and pretty wet. So hopefully it keeps going that way all of summer and we don't have much of a bushfire season. But it is important to keep your eye on that long-term forecast and what we're expecting, especially if it does start to dry out towards the end of January into February. Because traditionally, we do have some late seasons. So we know that the bunyip fires in particular were very late in the bushfire season and can still do a significant amount of damage. So unfortunately, the fire season is never truly over until it is. So local vegetation wise, when we look at the local vegetation around Warburton and the Australian bush in particular, we know that our bushlands do require some fire in the landscape on an ad hoc basis in order to germinate and regrow. So fire is important to the landscape. Of course, though, it is a risk to us. In particular, the mesmates and the fibrous trees out in the Warburton area, along with the stringy barks as well, represent significant problems for us. Unfortunately, those barks, as beautiful as they are, they do lead to ember attack, because once they light up, they're on fire, and with the winds and convection columns that it caused, they do cause us a few issues. The other thing to be aware of as well is with the bushland that we have, ladder fuels. So when you've got fire burning through at ground level, then it gets into small shrubs and then steps up into smaller trees and into the larger trees. That can also cause us a few problems, because that's how it encourages the growth of a fire and turns it into what we call a crowning fire, which is when the fire is in the top of the trees. That's usually what you see on the news when you see a huge fire front and you've got these flames leaping 60 meters into the air. That's usually because it's a crowning fire and it's already in that tree canopy. While it's on the ground, it doesn't quite look as spectacular, but it's also a lot better news for us on the ground as we try to battle the fires. With the bad days that we do get through Warburton as well, with the way that the valley is formed and the way that the winds whip through, that is certainly a significant risk for us, because the forecast may tell us one thing, but what the winds are actually doing from a local area could be very different. So the winds do get manipulated around the mountains and through the valleys. So we do have to be very aware of what that means for us, especially with a lot of mountainous terrain in the area. So we do rely on local spot forecasts from firefighters a lot in these areas for that very reason. So if you do get observations, and they might come from Coldstream or somewhere like that, that may not accurately represent what the wind's doing from a speed or a direction point of view within Warburton. So we do have to be careful of those. It also means that things can burn slightly differently to how we may expect. But the local risks to Warburton. Now, I could really leave this to you. You guys could almost fill in the blanks, to be honest. But certainly some of the local risks that we have, and Hazel will go into a bit more detail shortly for us, is all around the traffic, tourists. So we do need to be really mindful that tourism is great for the local area as far as the economy goes. They do obviously lead to a lot of problems as far as traffic management, population growth for that day, and what that does in the local area. Power outages can also be an issue, especially on windy days or if a fire is to start. And well, let's be honest, losing power is a fairly irregular thing in Warburton. So that's certainly a risk to us in the local landscape. And a lack of visibility as well if a fire was to start. Also, being in the valley, if the smoke does start to pull down there, visibility can be very low. And with the mountainous terrain around the town, it can be very hard to see where that fire is actually coming from and where the smoke's coming from. So it can be quite disorientating trying to pinpoint where the risk is. But you don't want to hear from me about local risks. I'm not the most important person to be talking to you about the local risk. So at this point, I am going to welcome Captain Hazel. So we'll get Hazel to be host and hopefully join us in person. If you just want to turn your camera on there for us, Hazel. Fantastic.
I have.
So Hazel, we'll throw it over to you to have a chat about the local risks. Over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks everybody who's joined us this evening. We're very lucky having Ben as a presenter here tonight because he's well aware and has already given you some of the context of living in Warburton. If you're in Warburton, East Warburton, Big Pats Creek, living, working or visiting regularly to here, it is an amazing place. I choose to live here. You can tell from my accent, I'm not from here. It's beautiful. We're surrounded by the bush, we've got the river coming through and the community is amazing. So my first thing I always want to say is, yes, there's a risk of fire, but it's a great place to live. So let's live with it and plan for it. What do we have up here? We have with all the trees around us, we've got a big history of fire in this area, from the big fires like 1939 fires and Ash Wednesday fires, and you'll have seen pictures of our township under threat and with the trees being naked of their leaves in the aftermath of those fires. But what we haven't really had is fire in the landscape recently. The Black Saturday fires were further north of us, the Gippsland fires south. And the last year we had some smaller fires out in the Camberville area, and you'll have seen some activity, but there's nothing really been around us in this township area for quite some time. There's some fuel reduction burns that DELP do to mitigate some of the fuel loadings in key areas around our township, but largely what we've got is full on bush. You know, all the undergrowth, the ladder fuels are all there. We think that we're maybe not as much at risk of grass fires. Thanks, Ben's just put up the picture there for us, and you can see if you pinch that out, Warburton sits right in that valley, surrounded by bushes as far as the eye can see. It's what we love. But that's what brings the risk. We think that we're not at risk of grass fires, but there are some areas. Big Pats Creek has got some paddock areas and out the back of Hazelwood Road. Now, that they could carry some fire quite quickly into the bush landscape for us. So a bit of a mix. The biggest risk I think we have for ourselves as residents, visitors and the tourists is the one road in, one road out. There is no point in driving out towards Reefton and McMahon's Creek. You're driving further into the bush. There's not much shelter out there. Those communities are already going to be dealing with their own issues out there. So everybody's trying to go one way out and down towards Lydydale direction. That's the biggest risk we have. So I think what I'm really asking for people when they look at this talk and the information that Ben gives to us is deciding what you're going to do with the information that is available to you, whether it's through the Vic Emergency app, through our local radio station on 96.1, which helps with some of the bandwidth that we have for getting good reception out here. You know, it's the thing in the hills, isn't it? You know, it doesn't always work for us. So we've got our own radio frequency. What are you going to do with that information, and what choices do you want to make? Because if you don't leave early, if you are in the valley and things go pear-shaped, you haven't got many options. We have 5 fire trucks in our local brigade. 4 of those are water carrying trucks. What have you got? About 1,500, 1,800 houses, 2,000 odd there, 4,000 population. We are not going to be coming to each and every house. If there's a fire up here, we will get other fire trucks up here to help us if we have the time and if we know about it. But if the lightning strikes right here, it will move quickly into our housing area. And the one road that you're trying to get out on is the one road that they're trying to bring the fire trucks in on. So choice to live here, choice to understand the risks, and choice to not be here if it's a bad day. That's where I'll leave it on local risks, but I would just like to say, for further local information, we do have the Warburton Fire Brigade CFA Facebook page, so do message us through there. Happy to arrange to meet up and talk with individual issues later on if you have them. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Hazel. That's fantastic. So as we keep talking about, and we talk about it to nauseam, but it is all about having a plan. So we do choose to live where we live, but it's important that we plan for it as well. As Hazel touched on, between East Warburton, Warburton and surrounds, there are around 2,000 dwellings, population of 4,000. So assuming the fire starts in the area, there's 1 truck to every 500 house. So up to you, but the maths are not in your favour. So keep that in mind when you are doing your planning. Do not rely on having help from a fire truck if there is a bushfire in the town. So with that in mind, just pause, have a moment, have a think about, with the risk in the area and not being able to rely on a fire truck, what does that mean for your bushfire plan? Is it starting to change how you're thinking? Maybe you don't have a plan yet, and that's why you're here tonight. And if that's the case, welcome. And we hope that this will help step you through and get you to start thinking about those sorts of things. But if you're not quite sure what a fire is going to mean to you or what to expect from the fire, well, let's have a bit of a chat about that now. So what to expect from a fire if one is to begin. And as Hazel said, it's been a while since there has been one directly in the area. So there is a chance of it happening. Because what we do know is that Victoria does have a lot of fires, being one of the most fire-prone areas in the world. And of course, the fires that we had down in Gippsland and in the northeast got a lot of media coverage over the summer. So we would have seen a lot of different images, but not all of them represent exactly what's going to happen in our local area and some of the local threats that we have. So there are two really important aspects that we're going to touch on tonight. And the first one, as you may have already guessed, is ember attack. So ember attacks are those little bits of fire that drop down from the sky and can cause a lot of damage, and is one of the main contributors towards actually losing houses in a bushfire. So it often doesn't take the main fire front in order to cause house loss. It can be those embers dropping in the gutters, getting into those really hard to reach places and starting smaller fires that can impact our houses first. So instead of me trying to sit here with my hands flapping, trying to describe exactly what that all means, I'm going to stop showing my screen here and we'll jump to our first animation that Taryn's probably got lined up ready for us to give you a bit more of an oversight as to what it's all about. Thanks, Taryn.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers like large pieces of burning ribbon bark hundreds of meters into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometers beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometers ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways, and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realize the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Taryn. And hopefully that animation brings a different perspective as to how fires actually spread in our environment. So we thought it'd be something a little bit different to actually have a presentation for once on it. And we hope you enjoyed the animation. It certainly makes it a lot easier, as I said, than me flapping my arms trying to describe how the embers drop. But hopefully it also brings home just how incredibly dangerous ember attacks are, especially to Warburton, with fires that are happening up in the hill. It doesn't take much for those winds to whip up And even if it's on the north side of Mount Donabuang under a strong northerly wind, there's no reason they can't pick up embers from a fire there and drop them into the town itself. So you may not be able to see the fire because it's on the other side of the hill, other than smoke obviously coming up, but you may start getting impacted by those ember attacks, which is why we stress so much that hopefully for most, if not all, your plan A for your bushfire plan is to leave early, because that's the only way to make sure you're not impacted by ember attack directly, is to not be in the area on a high risk fire danger day. But hopefully that brings that home a little bit more. So just a few other images around ember attack and what they do. In particular, in the bottom right-hand image there of the fire right next to the house, that's a really common occurrence, especially when there's mulch or garden materials right up against the wall of a house. Embers land in there, they start forming, the wind blows them into those sorts of areas, and it doesn't take long before that lightweight material actually ignites and starts those spot fires right on the doorstep of your house, quite literally at times. The other topic that we like to address is radiant heat. Radiant heat's probably the biggest threat to us as people. So radiant heat, and we'll watch another video because again, it's better than me trying to describe it, but it is that really intense heat that you feel coming off a fire. And unfortunately, it is one of the leading causes of death during a fire itself. So it's often not the actual flame from the fire front that gets us, it's often that radiant heat that comes from it. So I'm going to, again, stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Taryn, who has another little animation for us. Just remember, if any of this does cause any bad memories, step away for a minute or two and come back and join us after the video. Thanks, Taryn.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square meter, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved natural fiber clothing like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defense against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And again, hopefully that's a lot better than me trying to flap my arms around and trying to describe how it all works. Trust me, the flapping of the arms works well in person, not so great over the computer screen. So I hope that does help explain some of the dangers that we face with radiant heat and why it's so important to cover up. It's also why we stress a lot about how we get so nervous when we see on TV people wearing thongs, short shorts and a singlet with a garden hose on top of their roof, because it's the radiant heat that we're worried about with them and what that's doing as far as smoke as well by not wearing any face coverings. So when you see the wildfire firefighters out there, so Hazel and her team in particular, they're in those yellow overalls that you've all come to know and love. They've got the jacket on, long pants, solid boots. They've got the P2 mask on, goggles, helmets, and the lot. It's not because that keeps them cooler, because it certainly doesn't, but it definitely keeps them a lot safer in the long run, and using those natural materials as well, as opposed to the synthetic materials like what I've got on tonight. But again, the best way to avoid any impacts of radiant heat is not to be there to begin with. So again, plan to leave early. And I know I say it over and over again, but please plan A, leave early, which means leaving before a fire has even started. On those high risk days, get out, don't be around it, and that way radiant heat can't impact you. But why take it from us when we talk about getting out early? What we do is we talk to a lot of people post fires about what they experienced and what they actually went through. Now we'll jump onto a short little clip in just a moment, but these 4 people out of mostly Black Saturday gave us a bit of an idea of what it's like to be under an ember attack and be home when a fire does start. And what we do find, and with all the people that we do talk to, I'm yet to meet one that has told me that, yes, I stayed and defended my property, and yes, I would do it again. Not once have I heard someone say that. Everyone who I talk to who has stayed to defend their property have said that that was the worst thing they'd ever thought of doing, and there is no way that they would do it again. So what we encourage you is, if you're not listening to us, at least listen to the people that have gone through it on their own and learn from their experiences. So once again, Taryn, I'll throw it over to you and we'll just quickly hear from a few people. Again, if any of this brings up those bad memories or you don't want to watch the video, step away for just a minute or two and then we'll get back to our normal presentation.
Ten years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
In future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
Excellent, thank you very much. So if that doesn't help bring it home, then I'm not sure what will. So what does this mean for you? So just to summarize some of the things that we've covered off in this little section of the presentation is that radiant heat is one of the biggest killers. So we want to try and avoid being impacted by radiant heat as much as we can. With the heat and the stress of a fire, our decision-making process can be severely impacted. So as much as we're thinking nice and clearly now, it's been a coolish day, overcast, bit of rain, we're all very relaxed and we can think about what we would do if there was a fire on our doorstep. Now, fast forward that to a really hot day with the smoke, embers falling from the sky. It's very quick to lose that common sense train of thought, which is why we keep harping on having a plan and having it written down. So you have something that you can physically grab to help guide your good decision-making process. Best of all, initiate your plan before there's even a fire. Leave early, get out, and not be impacted at all. That's what we would love for everyone to do. Exit roads may be blocked, as Hazel touched on before when she was talking about local risks, especially with some of the large trees that we do have roadside in the area. It doesn't take much, and it doesn't even take the fire. All it takes is some high winds and heat stress for some of the trees to fall down, block the highway, and then that's it. Nobody's going anywhere. So we do need to be really aware of the different risks that brings to us. So before we do push on to how do you know if there is a fire, we're going to do another quick little poll because we do love them. And this is a really short one. What we want to know, and you can choose more than one, is what do you think would impact your ability to make a good decision? So we've got a few different options. Is it the stress, rapidly changing situations, not having enough time? What is it do you think that's going to be the most stressful to you if you needed to try and make a good decision under those sort of stressful impacts? So we'll give it another few seconds. I'm a terrible singer, so I'm not going to try and sing you any thinking music. Let's see if we can get a few more. Couple more. So hit the one that you want or the ones that you want, hit submit. That will pop through to us and we'll have a look at the results in just a moment. And then we'll push on to talking about how do you know if there is actually a fire in the landscape, which is a particularly challenging topic, especially in Warburton, where we know that visibility can be a bit of an issue. So let's have a look at those results. So the majority of you have gone for rapidly changing situations, and that's a great one because the situation, especially around that Warburton area with the impacts of ember attack and the way that the weather does come around the valley a little bit, that situation does change quite rapidly out in our area. All it takes is for it to get into a paddock, race through that paddock into another bit of bushland, and that changes the scenario again for us. Stress, absolutely. We spoke about that briefly before. Not having enough time, communication breakdowns, heats, things not going to plan. Absolutely. That's why we do try to have a couple of different plans there. So we have our plan A, a plan B, so that we can try and factor that in to reduce the amount of stress that will hopefully cause us. So thanks everyone for contributing to that one. It does make it a lot more fun and helps us understand what you're thinking when we talk about these things. So let's push on. So how do you know if there is a fire in the landscape or in the area? It's a very broad topic, but we'll do what we can to get through it. I do encourage you, if you do have a question, and I know a few of you have been posting them in the chats, make sure you throw it into the chat there for Taryn. She'll take a look at it while I continue to talk, and hopefully we can answer all your questions as we go. So let's start at the very top line. Let's talk about fire danger ratings. The first thing I want to know from you, and yes, you guessed it, it's another poll. I want to know from you, do you think that the fire danger rating is going to tell me how likely it is a fire will start? Or is it telling me of how bad a fire would be if one was to start? Very similar wording, very different meanings though. So we'll give you guys a really quick one. You've got really one or the other to choose from. It's a 50-50 chance. Doesn't matter if you get it wrong. I don't know who gets it wrong, but it's a great learning exercise nonetheless. So we see some votes coming through. A few more, 5 more seconds, and then we'll close it off. Beautiful, that will do it. Let's have a look. So a third of you have said that fire danger ratings will tell us how likely it is a fire will start. 2/3 of you have said that it tells us how bad a fire would be if one was to start. Now the correct answer for this one is how bad a fire would be if it was to start. Now this does cause a bit of confusion and it's something that we're working really hard to try and educate people on, because the fire danger rating is all about how bad that fire will be if it was to start, rather than the actual risk of the day. So when we look at low to moderate and the highs, we expect that if a fire was to start, we'd be able to get onto it relatively quickly. For example, today is obviously a low to moderate day down here. And I'm sure if a small little grass fire started next to the recreation reserve, Hazel could probably turn up in some good sturdy boots and stomp it out. That's how wet and green it is at the moment. But of course, as we go further up the fire danger ratings, the ability to be able to contain that fire greatly reduces. So let's have a look at 3 of them in particular. So severe, extreme, and code red, right up the top end. Now we talk about code red a lot. code red a lot, but we'll talk about the other ones as well. So on a severe day, the sort of fires that we're expecting is, we've got those hot, dry, windy conditions. And if a fire was to start and take hold, it may be uncontrollable. So at severe, we're pretty nervous about any fire starting in that severe area, especially if it started somewhere a bit more remote from a lightning strike, and it takes a bit longer to get resources in there. If it really takes hold, it might be uncontrollable. So we're fairly nervous about those days. Despite the fact that we all get fixated on code red, severe has the potential to do a lot of damage. On an extreme day, you can expect to have an extremely hot, dry, windy conditions. If a fire was to take hold, it will be uncontrollable. So there's not really any if or buts. If a fire starts an extreme day, we don't think we've got much of a chance of controlling it. It's going to take hold, it's going to be unpredictable, it's going to be fast moving, and it is going to start spot fires. So we are going to have ember attack ahead of the fire front. So we're incredibly concerned about extreme days. Code red days, they're just a little bit more severe than an extreme, not by much, to be honest. The key difference to take away from an extreme and a code red is that on a code red day, houses are not built to withstand a fire on a code red day. We don't, if a house is impacted by fire in a code red, we don't expect it to survive the fire. That's the kind of intensity that we're expecting from a fire on that sort of day. Now, when we do our fire danger ratings, we take them very seriously, and it's a bit like a weather forecast. We do try to forecast around 4 days ahead of time. And if you do want to know the forecast, you can jump onto the CFA website or check your Vic Emergency app, and it'll actually give you a bit of a forecast as to what we're expecting. That's really helpful when you talk about bushfire plans, having something that you can go back to that is a bit of a common constant, constantly updated, forecasted. It's a really great starting point for a bushfire plan. But to put in perspective, because we do understand that leaving early, it is a bit of an inconvenience depending on the day and what you had planned. But we want to give you a bit of a sense of how rarely or how much these sorts of things happen. So we'll jump up with another poll, and I want you to have a bit of a think and just answer the question for me around how many code red days we've had in the central region. So in your neck of the woods, how many code red days do you think we've had in the last 5 years? So I know we all struggled to think back to even last year, but try and put your memory caps on for the last 5 years and have a think about how many code red days you think have been called in the central region. We've got rates flying in already, so that's great to see. So we'll give that another quick moment. You're all very quick on this one, which is excellent. All right, we're slowed up around there. So let's have a quick look at the results. So 28% of people have gone for 0, 28% have gone for 1. We've got a few in the 2s, 3s, 4s, 5. Everyone's got a vote. The correct answer is over the last 5 years, and well, even over the last 10 years since we've had code red, we've had 0. Not 1. We've had 0 code red days in the central region. So they are incredibly rare. And even when we look at extreme days, on average, we get 1 a year. And that's over the last 10 years. Obviously, it depends on the year. Sometimes we have more, sometimes we have less. But on average, we talk about 1 extreme day, and severes are not that much more. So we do really encourage you, when you make your bushfire plans and you're working at a trigger point on when you should activate your bushfire plan, the fire danger ratings are a really great tool to have there. They're forecasted, we take them seriously, and they all follow the same metrics. And now you know that with extreme days, we don't get many. Code red, we're yet to have one in the central region. So they're a really great tool to go back to for coming up with that trigger point for your bushfire plan. So let's talk about getting information for a bushfire. So informal resources. So the old unofficial word of mouth. Now, there are a number of ways to get information about a bushfire. Let's talk about a few of the ways that we don't particularly enjoy, and we'll tell you why. So the Yarra Valley notice board. Go on, be honest. Who's on the Yarra Valley notice board? there's probably a few. So the Yarra Valley Notice Board is really great if you want to find a recommendation for a plumber or something like that, or somewhere that's great to get a bite to eat. It is not a great source of information for bushfires. I'm sorry, I know a few of you are probably heartbroken, but to be honest, it's probably about as reliable as trying to work out why the helicopter is in the sky. So please don't use the Yarra Valley Notice Board as your official piece of information. But even talking to people second and third hand, you know, if a friend talks to you and goes, well, I just spoke to my brother whose best friend is in the CFA up at, let's go up in Bright, let's go completely northeast. And they said that the fire near Hillsville is heading your way. That's absolutely no way to make sure that that's actually accurate. So what we want to do is try and implement a way for you all to be able to get good, reliable information where possible. Now, we do understand that there are battles, especially up the line, in being able to try and get reception, try and get the radio network and trying to get that information. We know it can be a challenge, especially if there is fire in the landscape, which is why we have a number of different tools in our toolkit. So there's also the local news, and Hazel touched on it before as far as the radio goes. If you're a little bit closer to town, 774 ABC Melbourne is also a good source of information. The Vic Emergency Hotline is available, 1-800-226-226. Great phone number to put up on the fridge and have on there just in case you need it. You can jump online. So Emergency Management Victoria, EMV, website, social media wise, again, please, not the Yarra Valley Notice Board, but jump onto the official channels. So jump onto the CFA Facebook page and Twitter page, jump onto EMV. That's where you're going to get the most up-to-date information during an emergency. Now, while it's nice and cool and you want to learn more about fires, jump onto Warburton CFA's Facebook page, follow them, watch them. They give you great information about events and community events coming up and how you can better prepare yourselves for the fires, but they're not your go-to source during a fire because they're a little bit busy trying to put the fire out. So make sure you do follow Warburton CFA to get lots of information in the lead up to fires, but make sure you also jump onto the official Emergency Management Victoria and CFA Facebook pages to get more of that up-to-date information during the emergency. The Vic Emergency app, of course, has a huge following and uptake. Now's a really great time to check to see if you've got your radius set, if you have a radius for a watch zone. Coming into summer, now's a good time to double check to see if you've got that set up. The National Relay Service is a great tool for those who are hard of hearing and need assistance in that level. There are interpreter services available. And of course, we do have emergency alerts that can go off. Now we'll talk about warnings in just a moment, but emergency alerts via text messages or automated phone calls are around. So they will work if you've got reception and if you're home for the fixed line or the landline service. So if your phone is turned off or you don't have reception, you won't receive the notification. So when this service first came out, we did get a few questions around if an emergency alert is sent, will it turn on my mobile phone? No, unfortunately it won't, because it does rely on picking up your reception from where you are at the moment to know that you're actually there. So hopefully that makes a bit more sense. But let's talk about warnings and advice and what they actually all mean. So there are a few different levels. Now, we do have the basic, the advice message. So it means that there's an incident occurring in the area. It's a heads up. It's your cue to start monitoring the information and the conditions coming through. So if you get the advice, that's the absolute earliest heads up that you could potentially get from a warning. Then it can escalate to a watch and act. So that means that there's an emergency developing nearby and you need to take action now to prepare. So now's your moment. You need to start taking action. Because unfortunately, once we get to an emergency warning level, you are in an imminent danger. You need to take action to defend yourself. And often it does have the line in it that you will be impacted. So it's too late. You will be impacted. You need to stop and shelter where you are and start taking those actions to protect yourselves. Now, with warnings, it doesn't happen necessarily in that order. So you may not get the advice message, then a watch and act, then an emergency warning. Because if the fire does start on your doorstep, the first notification you may get is an emergency warning, if you get a warning at all. So do not wait for a warning to take action. If something's happening in the area, be proactive. Have a look at what's happening and start implementing your bushfire plans. Do not wait or rely on a warning. A couple of other notifications that you may get is an evacuation notice or a community information notice. Please do not rely on an evacuation notice to tell you when to evacuate. These don't get used very often. In fact, the first time I've seen one used was in East Gippsland earlier this year, and that's reliant on certain conditions happening. Do not expect to receive an evacuation warning. That's the biggest takeaway I'd like you to take from this. And community information will obviously help give you, it may have a newsletter for updates for your community or notifications of low-level incidents happening in the area. So let's talk about how fires actually start and the sort of timelines and why we tell you not to rely on warnings. Now, this is a hypothetical situation, not necessarily how it always goes, but at some point a fire needs to start. Now, it's very rare that someone watches the fire start and calls 000 the moment the fire starts. So for the purpose of this scenario, we're going to say that the fire has started at around the 10-minute mark or is reported to 000 at that 10-minute mark. So the fire's already up and going, has been for around 10 minutes. You call 000, you give the details. Now from there, the pager and the notifications will go off for the fire brigade. They'll all hastily get down to the station, get changed and get that truck out the door. Of course, that's only half the battle. Then they have to actually get to where the fire is. So by the time that all that happens, we could be at the 15-minute mark, if not a little bit longer, given the area. You know, the trucks are quite heavy. You're looking at sort of that 12 to 15 ton for a truck. They don't move uphill terribly quickly. So depending where they're going, it could take a bit of time. But in this instance, we're going to say at the 15-minute mark, that fire is burning quite well, and we're on scene. Good old Captain Hazel is there on scene, has a look at the fire and goes, "Whoa, this isn't good news. I think I'm going to get an advice message out and give the community a heads up." So she radios in and starts her processes to get that advice message out to you all. So that goes through, and that goes through a few processes in order to go out on all the different medias that we talked about before. So we're now half an hour in, and you're getting an emergency warning. So we're at about 20-minute mark when the advice message comes out, most likely around the 25-minute mark. And now we're up to roughly the half-hour mark for an emergency warning to be issued. Now, in that time, the fire can move quite a bit of distance. So you may have had an advice message initially, and you may go straight to an emergency warning. It's not completely unusual, especially early on in the fire when it's developing, and we're still trying to work out what it's up to. So one of the key things that we want to talk about in this one is, this isn't exactly how a fire may go. It could be very, very different. It all depends on how developed it is, how quickly we get there, the conditions of the day. I could keep running off the list, but we'll be here all night. But just know that just because a fire has started, it doesn't mean that we're going to start issuing advice messages straight away. We need to get there, work out what the fire is doing and how it's going to behave, and then start getting that information out to you. Because our priority is to try and get fire trucks onto this fire. One of the big ones that I like to talk about is using your sensors. That is the #1 tool that you have in knowing if there's a fire in the local area. So forgetting about radios, social media, the Yarra Valley notice board, and all of those sorts of things, you live in a beautiful part of the world. On those really warm days, step outside, Have a look around. Can you see anything? Is it a bit hazy? Can you see some smoke coming from the top of the hills? Have a listen. Can you hear fire trucks? Can you hear sirens? Can you hear a helicopter? Take a deep breath in. If the area isn't so fresh and you get a bit of a smoky tinge to it, that's your cue to find out why. Start investigating. Start going into the Vic Emergency app and having a look and see where that fire might be if it's been recorded. If you can see the fire, call 000. You might be the person calling it in. You might be the very first person to call 000. So never assume that the fire's been called in. Because at the end of the day, someone has to call it in. Why not you? So please use your senses, because at the end of the day, it's up to you to be responsible for your actions and how you behave during the fire. So let's talk about planning and decision making, just very, very briefly. So having a think about the different risks in your area, any previous experience that you've actually had with fire, and how we keep informed with how fires happen in the area. We're going to run through just two very quick scenarios, very similar, but somewhat different as far as outcomes. So first of all, we're going to talk about a beautiful day. It's hot in the valley. So we've got a fire danger rating of extreme. It's 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. Let's pretend it's not COVID times. So it's 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. You look outside, it's hot, it's windy. It's one of those really stinking dry days, even early in the morning. It's one of those days you wake up and go, well, geez, today's not looking good. So you know it's an extreme fire danger rating. You jump in the car, you're shooting off to school. It might be work. You might be just going down the line to do some shopping. And you head out. And it's just one of those days where you're driving along, you feel the heat hit the windscreen and start warming the car instantly. It's almost like it's 9 o'clock in the morning and you're sweating. You're like, oh, never a good feeling. And I'm sure we've all felt it. It's around lunchtime and you overhear people talking about a fire that has started near Mount Donabuane. Now, also instantly, this grabs your attention. So you grab the Vic Emergency app to find out that there is a fire that has started along Mount Donabuane Road. You jump in your car, you start heading home because you want to grab your stuff. Now, you get up and you hit a roadblock. Victoria Police are there. They tell you, I'm sorry, you can't get into the area. The fire's burning, there are trees down. You can't get in. You'll have to find somewhere else to go. So let's have a think about that for a minute. You have to find somewhere else to go. You cannot return home. So thinking about last year, during that really hot, dry summer, if this was to happen, where would you be? Would you be at home? Would you be at work? Would you be away? And would you have been prepared if this has happened? So we'll get a poll up and we want to know a little bit from you as to what sort of situation would you find yourself in? So it's up there on your screen now. It's 3 quick questions. So where would you be on an average Wednesday in summer? Thinking about last summer, would you have been prepared if you need to spend a few nights away from your home? And last summer, did you have an emergency kit packed with clothes, important documents, photos, medicines, all of those wonderful things? So just remember, we can't see who's answering, so be as honest as you want. If you have any extra comments about this sort of scenario, or you've got suggestions or ideas, feel free to chuck them in the chat. We always like hearing what you're thinking. So feel free to share any scenarios that you've gone through. All right, well, we've got a good response for this one. So let's have a look at the results. All right, so hopefully they're up there on your screen. The majority of you would be home, which, you know, in this day and age, especially under COVID conditions, that's quite likely to happen. A quarter of you would be at work, wherever that may be. It could be as far as the city, or it could be just somewhere down the line. And, well, someone's lucky enough to be on holiday. Not that I'm jealous at all. So thinking about last summer, would you have been prepared if you needed to spend a few nights away? Over half of you said yes, which is really great news and probably one of the higher results that we've had when we've done this survey. So well done to all of you, pat on the back. A few of you have said no, so 30% said no. So that could be something that you take away from tonight and look to implement as part of your bushfire plan. And a few of you are unsure. Maybe it depends on the day, where you were. So, you know, again, if that can prompt some thinking tonight, then that's a really great thing. And 60% of you did have a kit packed last summer with important docs and all those sorts of fun things, which is absolutely terrific. But now's a really great time to start thinking about that kit again. Do you have everything that you need? Has anything changed in the last 12 months? So are there things you need to add in, things you can take out? Have you updated your insurance policy? Have you checked your insurance policy? That's always a great thing to do. So we'll jump off that one. And now we'll take a look at the same day, but a slightly different scenario. So in this scenario, just to mix things up a little bit, we want to know what would happen if you were at home and unfortunately you got stuck at home during this sort of situation. So it's the same day, except you jump on the Vic Emergency app to see that a fire is still a while away. It's up in the bush. It's not doing much that you think. So the little yellow shaded area on your phone doesn't quite reach your house from the warnings, and you think, I've got enough time to run home and grab some important stuff. So you drive home. You keep checking the screen, checking the little yellow triangle in the emergency app to see if you have enough time. So you get home and you start frantically moving around the house, grabbing everything. So do you have your birth certificate? Do you have prescriptions? Do you have the marriage certificate? Do you need the marriage certificate? Have you got the dog? Have you grabbed your partner? Have you grabbed the kids? Are the kids even home or are they at school? After all, who knows these days? So it's taking a little bit longer than you expected, but you're rushing around the house. Okay, have I locked up the chooks? Do I have the dog? Did I grab the dog? Didn't I talk about the dog before? I can't remember. It's hot. It's stressful. The smoke's starting to fill into the valley. Then all of a sudden you see that pile that you didn't burn off during winter sitting there that's just ignited from some embers. It's too late. You're being impacted by fire. So the embers have started falling and you feel that surge of adrenaline pumping through. We all know that feeling. The adrenaline starts building, your stomach drops a little bit. Now what do? Where are you going to go? So jump into, if you can jump onto your chat, would love to get a bit of an idea of if this happened to you, what would you have done? So we'll give you a couple of moments because a few of you are probably thinking, because unfortunately time does pass us by pretty quickly. Other things to consider, of course, during this scenario is, is there someone in the area that depends on you? Is there an elderly neighbour that you need to check on? Do you have horses in your backyard, or have you been adjusting for some people? What are your bushfire plans? What do you do now? What happens if your driveway's blocked because trees come down and you're stuck there? What do you do? And these are all the sorts of things that we have to think about. And I've probably gone into a little bit of information overkill and dumped it all onto you. So we've got one that's come through, go to the last resort refuge, which, we look at that and go, well, what happens if the trees come down though? There's so many if, buts and maybes, and we'll talk about driving during a bushfire shortly. So we need to really start thinking about all those different plans that we have. So we have a plan to stay and defend just in case. Fantastic. So you've thought ahead. You've thought, my plan A is to leave early and get out. But if I am stuck at home, I'm well prepared for that. And we'll talk about plan C shortly of what happens after that. Isn't the last resort like leaving at the last minute? So what we're talking about in this scenario is what happens if you haven't followed that bushfire plan and you are actually stuck at home? What do you do and those sorts of things like that? So you're absolutely correct. We're talking about that last minute stuff that we want to avoid. But unfortunately, we do know that quite a few people do it. And what we want to get out of this experience and this example is what happens and how prepared are you if that was to happen? And just reinforcing that message again, that the easiest way to save yourself from this stress, anxiety of what might happen is to leave early and not put yourself in this situation at all. So thank you very much for bringing up that point, because that really does drive back what we're trying to talk about, which is leave early, don't be impacted by any of this, and be safe. Because what I like to say at the end of a lot of these presentations, and I've told to many people in the past, is a lot of the times when you get to evacuation centres, the media is always hovering around. They want to interview someone with a really exciting story. My goal for all of you tonight is that you have a bushfire plan that you've got prepared and that you execute. And if you turn up somewhere and the media asks you about your story, you can look at them, shrug your shoulders and go, look, I'm really boring. I had a plan to leave early. I wasn't there when the fire started. I got out. I followed my bushfire plan. The media aren't going to want to talk to you. Not exciting enough. My goal is for none of you to be on the news talking about your story. I'd love all of you to be out, be safe, and hopefully have an enjoyable summer. So make a plan, be prepared. And yes, I know I've harped on it a lot, and I've told you about how much I was going to harp on it about. But this is why we're always urging you to have a written plan, practice that plan, and be prepared. So know what you'll do on a bad fire day. Have that plan. So have the stuff in your car if you're at work so that you can go to someone's place, or have that plan on where you're going to stay. Stay informed. Look at the forecast for the fire danger ratings and plan ahead, and make your property as prepared as possible, even if you don't plan on being home, because there is no harm in trying to give your house the best possible chance of surviving a bushfire. So let's push on and talk about what will happen just in case your plan does fail. So we've talked about plan A, which is leaving early. We've touched on plan B, which is, what happens if you're stuck at home and preparing your property. But let's go into a bit more detail around plan C. What happens when A and B fails? I call it plan O bugger. What you want to call it is completely up to you. So the first thing that we need to talk about is what you're going to wear. Now, the radiant heat video touched on this really well. It's all about having those natural fiber for clothing. So long pants, long shirt, making sure that they're nice and loose, because you want the air to move around so it doesn't get trapped in your body. You want good circulation of air happening. So make sure they're fairly loose. And if you do already have this clothing, make sure you pull it out and try them on. Unfortunately, especially during the winter work we've just had with COVID, these clothing have a really bad tendency of shrinking a little bit. So we don't get bigger. I'm convinced that the clothing shrinks. So make sure you try it on, make sure it still fits. Have a hat that tries to help protect the embers from falling down the back of your neck, down the back of your shirt. That's a surefire way to make you dance. Eye protection. So ski goggles are good for this, or getting designated goggles to put away in your kit. P2 masks, hit up the local hardware store. They're a low cost investment, which is really important to have on hand just in case. Sturdy boots are really important. We want to make sure we look after our feet. The ground can get quite hot, so we don't want to be walking around in just runners as we try to defend our houses should we be put in that situation. Again, the radiant heat touched on this quite a bit, but sheltering inside solid objects or behind solid objects is really important. So we know that the radiant heat can come through glass and can heat us up. So we're talking about really good solid objects. So it might be the shed, it could be a concrete tank that you're hiding behind, not in, but behind, or the house or something like that. If you've got really good boulders with good clearance around them, you may even get behind those with a good woolen blanket to try and protect yourself further from that radiant heat. So you're trying to find that solid object to put between you and the fire. We talk about places of last resort, and we'll touch on it shortly. I know that someone touched on it before as part of their planning. But for swimming pools, dams and rivers, they're always a really interesting topic because people tell me how they're just going to jump into that pool and they'll be fine. Now, the only problem with that theory is that in order to breathe, your head needs to be out of the water, which exposes you to the radiant heat. So it's a bit of a catch-22. that the most important thing that you need is actually going to be exposed to the harshest elements. So even if your plan does involve a pool, a dam, or a river, please make sure that you take a woolen blanket with you to put over yourself and give yourself that protection from the radiant heat. Have your P2 mask on and try and keep yourself covered up nice and well. If you can stay out of the water, that's even better, because of course, if something was to happen and you were to lose consciousness in a body of water, also drowning can come into play. So if you've got somewhere else, somewhere solid that you can seek shelter, that's always a good option as well. We'll talk about cars in just a moment, but neighbourhood safer places or a place of last resort as something that we just want to reaffirm. So there is one in Warburton, it's at the Recreation Reserve, but most importantly with these is that they're not an evacuation centre. They are literally a bushfire place of last resort. There are no scones, there are no coffees, there probably isn't even toilet facilities open. It's literally a piece of land that you can go to where we feel that the radiant heat will be low enough that you've got a chance of surviving. So please don't have it in there as your absolute go-to place, and it has to be incredibly close to your property to be effective. So if you have to drive several kilometres down a windy road with lots of roadside trees, it's probably not a good place to have in your plan. You may need to think of something else. So do spend a little bit of time coming up with different places that you can seek shelter around the house, or if the place of last resort is close enough, that may factor into your plan. But just remember, it's not an evacuation centre. You're not even guaranteed to have a fire truck there. It's literally just a place that's been deemed safer, not necessarily safe. So the following content or the following images that are about to pop onto the screen may be distressing for some people. We're about to talk about driving and sheltering in cars. So if you have gone through a scenario like this, now may be a great time to quickly take 60 seconds to walk away from the computer screen. So when we talk about driving and sheltering in cars, we want to, at pretty much all costs, try to avoid being in a car during a bushfire. Heavy smoke makes it nearly impossible to see what's coming up, and it can be quite disorientating, no matter how well you think you know the roads. You could hit a tree that's fallen or is close to the roadside and have an accident, or you may hit wildlife or livestock that have wandered out onto the road. So it is incredibly dangerous to be out there. Sheltering in a car from a fire is also incredibly risky. Cars are not designed for sheltering from a fire. They're designed to get you from place A to place B, and that's about it. If you are stuck in that situation, get the car off the road into a place with low grass or no vegetation around it, point the car towards the fire, turn all your hazard lights on, turn the car off, and get nice and low in the footwells. Woolen blankets are a huge asset to have, and that's why we encourage you to have woolen blankets in your cars, especially during the summer, just in case you do need to seek shelter. Please don't try to block the roads, because at the end of the day, as Hazel touched on, there is one road in, one road out. So that road that you're trying to get out on is the same road the fire trucks are trying to get in on. So that said, please don't try and turn the highway into a dual carriageway heading one way, because there will be emergency services trying to get into the area. So we know that the heat stress and the anxiety can make people really nervous, which is why we don't want you to be out on the roads during an emergency. So again, I bring it back to have a plan. So take action, make a plan. That is one thing that we definitely want all of you to do as a result of this session tonight. So we've thrown a lot of different bits of information from you, and after this you'll go to a website where you can download quite a few different bits of material and resources to help with your planning. There are also bushfire planning workshops that do happen over the summer, and a few other services available to you as well. Connect with your local brigade. I'll see Warburton Fire Brigade are on Facebook. As Hazel said, jump on there. Feel free to shoot them a message if you have any questions. They're a great local resource. But of course, you can also get in contact with the District 13 office. So their details are on your screen now. So if you do want to talk to anyone or get any more information, or to learn more about the different services that we do offer, from bushfire planning workshops to community fire guard groups, feel free to drop an email, d13comed@cfa.vic.gov.au. Darren will talk about it briefly in just a moment. And it's a really great place to get all these different bits of information. And Darren will touch on a few of the extra services that we can offer, both in a group environment and in a one-on-one way. So I think we will have another poll to pop up, although I may get that completely wrong. There it is. I actually got it right. That's excellent. I think that's the last one I have to try and remember. So what we want to know from you today is, did this meeting give you a better understanding of bushfire risk in your local area? Yes, no, confirmed what you already knew, which might be a good thing. And would you recommend this program to family, friends, or neighbours, especially thinking about those who might be new to the area? Before I stop sharing our screen though, so I'll let you guys keep working on that survey, and just while you're filling it in, support is available. So obviously today's presentation, there are different images and videos that may have brought back some memories for you. So you're not alone. Obviously Beyond Blue is there, or contact a lifeline if you do need to have a chat to someone about any experiences tonight might have brought up for you. So we'll have a quick look at the results from that last survey there. So did this meeting give you a better understanding of bushfires? 67% have said yes, 5% said no, and hopefully that means we've covered what you already knew, or confirmed what you already knew, 29%. So that's great. Hopefully we're reinforcing that bushfire message for you. Would you recommend this program? 100% for yes. So I'll make sure I tell my boss all about that I got a beautiful 100% on that one, which always makes me happy. And hopefully some of your friends, families, or neighbours can join us next time that there is a session in the area.